So on the screen behind me, you will see, next slide, titles of movies. How Stella Got Her Groove Back, Waiting to Exhale, Luca, The Wood, The Help. These movies are from different genres. Those of you who are parents will know that there are a lot of cartoons in there. But I would like to know from any of you, what is the running theme in all these movies? What is the theme in all these movies? I'll give you another second just to look. Are you so anointed? Mfundisi, we don't watch movies, Tina. We are holy. Yeah. They're not sitting in, yeah, it's not a single genre. It's not a, yeah. So, but what's the running theme in all these movies? Yes. All these movies are about friendship. I think you guys are trying to be deep, man. You're trying to look for something. No, all these movies are about friendship. You'll get a chocolate, brother. Because you got it. So then the next question becomes, and anyone, you can shout this out loud and clear so we can pick it up. What do you look for in a friendship? Or what do you look for? So what's your ideal friend like? Just one quality. Honesty? Fun? Support? A peaceful friend? Don't stress me out. Authenticity, okay? 2 more? Consistent? Oh, you guys got high ideals, man. 1 more? Timeless. Kindness. Kindness. I'm glad to hear about all these wonderful qualities that we are looking for in friends. Authenticity and kindness. But the truth is, if you were to ask many people about their lived experience of friendship, we would know that these qualities are sadly lacking in some of the people that we call friends. In a recent study, and I know it's an American study, but it dovetails with what many people have said to me over the last few weeks as I've been asking them about friendship. And this is what the results say. More and more people say they have fewer close friends than they once did. People are talking less often to their friends, and they're relying less on their friends for personal support. The truth is that most of our friendships are situationships. We are friends with them because we happen to be in the same situation. Either we're at work together, we go to gym together, or maybe even church. So our friendship is cemented by where we are at. So once we leave that situation, that friendship tends to disappear as well. Because these are the friends that we might watch the World Cup with. We might go out to dinner with. And we tolerate them every now and then. But these aren't the kind of people that I'm going to go to when my car gets repossessed. Or when I'm in need of some money. I don't go to these people. After all, what we used to love doing with these friends was to show up at the local Chisanyama in our German sedans. That was our friendship. And added to all these complexities and issues about friendship, we had COVID season. And when COVID season hit, it hit friendships hard. Because since the year 2000 and this 2020 rather, and this is what Stats SA tells us, more and more South Africans are reporting that they're depressed and lonelier than what they were in January of 2020. Most South Africans are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety disorders more than ever before. And many South Africans are saying, because of COVID, some strong friendships have dissolved. And if that was not hard enough, we live in a transient society, and our city of Midrand is very much transient. We're here today, and tomorrow we're living in Nairobi. So we can't build deep, meaningful friendships. Added to that, there's a burden of work and family. And so that stretches the time that you have available for other people outside your close-knit circles. The funny thing is that despite all these challenges to friendship that we see, we are all still in need of deep, meaningful friendships. They say that the older you get, you want to have 2 or 3 very good friends. People who you can grow old with, do life with, people who can contribute into your life and you do the same for them. But with friendship under attack, what are we to do? I trust that as we go through today's message, you would grow in your desire to build strong, meaningful, deep friendships. That though it be hard work, though there be all these problems that we've listed against friendships, that you would desire to be a good friend and to find good friends. We are in week 3 of our series, as we've been talking about In Pursuit Together. And so over these last 2 weeks, we've spoken about people who were on the side, on the periphery, so to speak, of the main characters in the book of Acts. And we've been learning principles from each of them of how we too can be part of God's story, though we're not on the main stage. Go with me to Acts chapter number 4. We're reading from verse 36. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus by birth, the one the apostles called Barnabas, which is translated son of encouragement, sold a field he owned, brought the money, and laid it at the apostles' feet. Now, some scholars believe that Joseph was one of the 72 that Jesus sent out in the book of Luke, in Luke chapter number 10. And so he was a person who was known among the apostles, which would make sense because they had already given him the nickname of Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. Clearly, Joseph must have been an encouraging fellow to receive such a nickname. For those of you who have nicknames, you know that the nicknames we get are useless and stupid. Bo Punglat, Bo Wallet, or Stoodla, which just means fat. Or there was a kid when I was growing up, they were calling him, hey, mosquito, because you're so skinny. I mean, that's just bad. And let me not go around the room and ask you your nickname. Some of you are blushing already, I can see. But Barnabas' nickname was son of encouragement, which speaks of his character. You see, many of us know Barnabas as Paul's traveling mate, the guy who went around with Paul. But there's much more to him than that. In fact, as I studied for today's session, I walked away with this image of Barnabas. He is a friend worth imitating. I would say that Barnabas is a kind of friend that we all need in our lives. Or to push it a bit further, we need to be Barnabases to others. So I'm going to run through a number of characteristics that we can copy from Barnabas' life. The first one we come across is that Barnabas was generous. Barnabas was generous. Right off the bat in Acts 4, we read that Barnabas sold a field and he gave money to the church so that those who didn't have would have more than enough. You see, in our circles, we think somebody is generous because they paid for our drinks or for our food when we had lunch. Oh, he's nice. He's generous. But Barnabas' generosity was not about endearing himself to the people. He saw a need and he met that need. God's people don't have enough, so therefore I will sell of my best and give so that these people would have something. Not only that, his generosity was an example to the church. If you read further on in the book of Acts, you would know that people sold things and they brought them to the apostles, and that's how the church lived. Seeing needs and meeting those needs. I believe that all of us have an opportunity to be generous. And every time the pastor says that, people say this, but I don't have money, I'm not rich. Child of God, generosity is not determined by how much you have in your bank account. It's an attitude of the heart. Because some of us can be generous with our time, our gifts, and our talents. And you bless your friends in that way. You are generous with your time. You're generous with your giftings toward them so that they can be equipped. The question I have for you this morning is, do you give generously of yourself to your friends? Are you the kind of friend who provokes your friends to generosity? Are you the kind of friend who looks for needs and meets them because you've been provoked by the Spirit of God? Generous friends teach us to be generous. The second characteristic that we pick up from Barnabas' life is that he was discerning. We see this in Acts 9 and 26. When he arrived in Jerusalem, speaking about Paul, he tried to join the disciples, the apostles that is, but they were all afraid of him, since they did not believe he was a disciple. Barnabas, took him and brought him to apostles and explained to them how Saul had seen the Lord on the road and that the Lord had talked to him, and how in Damascus he had spoken boldly in the name of Jesus. It seems that when Paul showed up, the disciples were afraid of him. Duh. This is the guy who wasn't imprisoning us. This is the guy who was attacking us all along. So when he shows up, all of a sudden he says, oh, I'm also a believer. People are like, get out of here. But there was someone in the crowd. Barnabas embraced the fact that Paul's life had been changed. Not only that, he goes to him and then he brings him to the apostles. When I read this, I thought to myself, was Barnabas crazy? Did he have a mental issue that you would go to the person who harassed and terrorized the church and you would embrace him with open arms? But then you focus on his name, son of encouragement, always looking for the best in people. Barnabas would only have gone to Paul if he had a discerning spirit that he could tell that, God, what you've done in this man's life is genuine, it's true. And so he boldly goes to him, introduces him to the apostles, and Paul is accepted as a fellow believer in Christ. What a friend we find in Barnabas. Somebody who would risk so much to affirm Paul. You see, as we grow up in our lives, we need people, we need friends who are discerning. People who can hear from God concerning you. People who can see things in your life and be able to say, that's God at work. That's not God at work. All of us need discerning friends. Not only was he generous, not only was he discerning, Barnabas was also reliable. How many of you have planned to go out for lunch and your friend says, I'm going to pick you up at 2 p.m., but now it's 3, and you're still waiting, but we're supposed to go for lunch? These are the kind of people who will be late for your wedding, though they're the bridesmaid and the best man. People who are unreliable. And we come across a lot of people who disappoint us, right? But not so Barnabas. In Acts 11, this is what we read of him. But there were some of them, men from Cyprus and Cyrene, who came to Antioch and began speaking to the Greeks also, proclaiming the good news about the Lord Jesus. The Lord's hand was with them, and a large number who believed turned to the Lord. News about them reached the church in Jerusalem, and they sent out Barnabas to travel as far as Antioch. When he arrived and saw the grace of God, he was glad and encouraged all of them to remain true to the Lord with devoted hearts. For he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, as large numbers of people were added to the Lord. So the church in Antioch, which was far away from Jerusalem, begins to grow. And when the guys in Jerusalem hear about this, they send somebody whom they could trust, somebody who was reliable. It could be that maybe when they heard that these other preachers were from Cyprus, they thought, Barnabas knows people from Cyprus. But that's not the distinguishing characteristic. It says here, he was full of the Spirit and faith. He was a good man. Those character traits spoke of how dependable he was. So the disciples trusted that he would do a good job in Antioch. And guess what? when Barnabas gets there, the church grows. He encourages them, and the church is added to. So as you survey your friendships, the question is, are you the kind of friend that people can rely on? Or are you the friend who says, I'm available, but when people call you, you drop them? You see, being reliable is a quality that is highly sought after. And it's not because you say you're reliable that we know you're reliable. We see it in the long term, that you keep to your word. When you say something, you do it time and time and again. And then we know that you are a friend who I can rely on. You see, when you are reliable, when you're dependable, we don't just trust you with mundane small tasks of, can you pick up my kids, can you do this? No. I trust you with the major issues of my life because I know that you will always show up for me. So Barnabas was reliable, but not only was he reliable, he was also a selfless friend. Verse 25 of Acts 11. Then he went to Tarsus. So Barnabas has gone to Antioch. He's preached the gospel. The church has been added to. Then he went to Tarsus to search for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the church and taught large numbers. The disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. And so as Barnabas is working in Antioch, he realizes that, I think there's a guy who could do a better job than I'm doing here. And by all measurements, Barnabas was doing a good job. But he realized that somebody else could do a better job. So he goes to Tarsus and he finds Paul and says, hey, my guy, I've got a job for you to do, man. I know you're gifted in this area. Won't you come and help me? And scripture says they spent a year in Antioch. If you read further down, it says Christians were first called Christians in Antioch. You see, having a friend who's not jealous of you is a true blessing. Instead of them being envious of your success or where you've arrived in life, they are always looking for opportunities to get you in. How can I be a blessing to you? Oh, I saw something, I saw a role, I saw a space. I think your gift set would work well there. I believe it's because Barnabas was secure in who he was. He knew that God had called him to be an encourager, and he was satisfied in that. And because he was satisfied, he was not threatened by anyone else's gift. So he could look for spaces and be like, Paul will fit here, Simon will fit here, Mark will fit here. And all I am called to do is to put them in position. Are you the kind of friend who recognizes opportunities for others, or are you the friend who always wants the spotlight on them? Because Barnabas shows us how to be selfless. See, this issue of always wanting the spotlight to shine on you breaks down marriages, because marriage is one of the ultimate friendships. When a couple's always competing as opposed to saying, honey, you shine. Let me say something controversial. Just because you're the husband doesn't mean you must handle the finances all the time. Maybe your wife knows the numbers and you don't. Somebody hit hard. You shine. And so instead of competing, we work alongside one another as friends to ensure that this union flourishes. That's how we flourish. But Barnabas was also humble. In Acts 14, Paul and Barnabas were preaching. And we're told, when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted, saying in the Lycaonian language, the gods have come down to us in human form. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was a chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the town, brought bowls and wreaths to the gates because he intended with the crowds to offer a sacrifice. The apostles, Barnabas and Paul, tore their robes when they heard this, and they rushed into the crowd shouting, "People, why are you doing these things? We are people also just like you. And we're proclaiming good news to you, that you turn from these worthless things to the living God who made the heaven, the earth, and the sea, and everything in them." You see, in a city like Joburg, we easily get caught up in our achievements and our success. If you were to scroll social media at any given time, you'll see people celebrating how well they're doing. And they'll go to the top restaurants and buy the most expensive alcohol. Konka, we see you there. The nice cars, and then you'll see on their Instagram post, their friends start writing, "Tumi, you deserve it. Well done." Nothing wrong with celebrating your friends. The problem is when all the praise and the relation stops right there. See, Paul and Barnabas here could have taken the glory from the people. No one would have known. They could have basked in the worship that the people were giving them. But because they knew that God is the one who's at work in and through them, they deflect to say, "This, God, belongs to you." And so we need humble friends around us to remind us that everything we've achieved, our success, all of it belongs to God. And He must get the glory, not us. You see, I've realized something about me. I need friends who are humble in my life. Friends who are not enamored by me. So no matter what I can do, no matter how many people I preach to, how many downloads I get, they'll be like, "Dude, come down. This is God's doing." However, how you can go, God is at work. Therefore, never forget that He's the one who should get the glory and the praise. You might not like to hear this, but here's the truth, child of God. And I just said it, I'll say it again. You need friends in your life who don't buy into the hype of who you are. I don't care how well you're doing at work. I don't care whether you're your parent's special child. You need friends around you who will hold you accountable and say, "Bruh, you're impressive, but we're not impressed." We are walking a journey of humility before God and before other people. And so far, if we're to look back at the few characteristics we've looked at in Barnabas' life, it would seem like he was the perfect friend, right? Generous, humble. And he seems like the ideal friend, the kind of friend that I would want to have. But you see, the truth is no one wants a perfect friend. No one wants I don't care what you think, no one wants a perfect friend because you will always be wrong and they'll always be right. And that's not a friendship. Even marriage shouldn't be like that. Barnabas, like all of us, was imperfect. In Galatians 2 and verse 11, Paul, writing to the church in Galatia, says this: "But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For he regularly ate with the Gentiles before certain men came from James. However, when they came, he withdrew," this is Peter, "and separated himself because he feared those from the circumcision party. Then the rest of the Jews joined his hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy." Barnabas, who came to Antioch, preached the gospel, people got saved, calls Paul, preached the gospel, people get saved, and then when the Jews come, Barnabas does this. How, dude? I thought you loved these people. I thought you served these people. But fear of man got Barnabas into trouble. Paul, seeing the wrong that his friend did, rebuked him for his action. And guess what? The friendship didn't crumble. The friendship didn't crumble. Why? Because Barnabas was able to admit that he was wrong. He was mature enough to take correction. You see, in the times that we are living in, we're too scared to call each other out. We say silly things like, I don't want to offend anyone, so let me keep quiet. That is all about self-preservation. There's no truth in that. This friendship was strong enough, as Ephesians 4 says to us, and speaking the truth in love. Bro, what you did is wrong, and I'm going to call you out. What we do, we love people by staying silent. Never admonishing, never correcting them, because somehow this fragile friendship will die if I say something about you. Then you are not a true friend. Our friends, just like we do, need to grow in maturity. They need to grow in righteousness. And part of doing that is to take criticism, to take correction, especially from your friends, because they love you and they want you to grow into a mature believer in Jesus Christ. So are you the kind of friend who takes correction? Are you the kind of friend who speaks truth into other people's lives? Let's look at the last characteristics, because this is a sad one. And because how many of you know that even the best of friendships come to an end? Because just sometimes, no matter how good that relationship is, life happens. And life happened to Paul and Barnabas. In Acts 15 and verse 36, we read the following. After some time had passed, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the brothers and sisters in every town where we've preached the word of the Lord and see how they're doing. Barnabas wanted to take along John, who was also called Mark. But Paul insisted that they should not take along this man who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. And Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed off to Cyprus. And from here, you go and jump into Acts 16. Paul goes with Silas and Timothy, and that's the end of the story. Interestingly enough, when people read this text, they say, hey, Barnabas was a fool, man. Barnabas was in the wrong. And as I was reading commentaries, guys who are supposedly clever than I am, all of them say, in this disagreement, because Paul was the apostle, Barnabas should have just said, okay, Paul, let's leave this guy, and just relented. And I think that's how many of us read the text, right? Barnabas is wrong. But I believe if you read the text that way, it's a very narrow way of reading the text. It's very narrow because in our minds and in our highly individualistic culture, we believe that the guy with the biggest byline is the most important person. Because after this, we never hear of Barnabas ever again in the book of Acts. Therefore, Paul was right. And maybe you might even add some spice here and say, you see, God's hand was on him. But if we were to look at the story from a different perspective, we would ask different questions of this disagreement. And I will start all the way in the beginning and say, who embraced Paul when no one else did? Who fetched Paul when he saw a ministry opportunity that he was already successful at? Who supported and traveled with Paul on his first missionary journey? The answer is the same right through. Barnabas. And I believe as I read the story that Barnabas insists on taking John Mark because he was like, Paul, dude, I believed in you when no one else did. I called you when I had no reason to call you, but because I saw that God had his finger on you, I said, come and preach the gospel in Antioch. Dude, your life was messed up before Jesus, but he gave you a second chance. This young man, yes, he deserted us. Yes, he left us behind, but I'm sure he's grown and matured. Let's take him. Let's give him his second chance. And so they could not agree, and they parted ways. I would say that how they handled the matter, I wasn't there, but just thinking for myself, I think they were both right, and they were both wrong at the same time. But What are we to learn from this story? Because many years later, in 2 Timothy 4:11, we read the following. Only Luke is with me. This is Paul writing. Bring Mark with you, writing to Timothy. Bring Mark with you when you come, for he will be helpful to me in my ministry. Many scholars say that this Mark that Paul is referring to in the book of Timothy is probably the same John Mark who he didn't want to travel with. It looks like Barnabas taking him grew him up such that he could be a person who was helpful to Paul many years later on. So here's the lesson I take from this. Our friendships should only break up, ideally break up, based on principle. Not because of petty fights, not because you don't like me or I don't like you, or we had a disagreement over sin in your life or my life. It should be because there are principles that we are called to live by as believers. And so there might be seasons of coldness in our friendship. That should not be reason for us to break up our friendship. We should be people of principle. And if your friendship breaks up because you were principled on certain things, trust me, your friends will thank you later for being principled many years from now. So friend, the way you're walking is not a Jesus walk. They might be angry at you now, they might break off the friendship, but we trust God that many years from now they'll come back. But the most important thing you can bring to any friendship is Jesus. And Paul and Barnabas had their friendship centered on Jesus Christ. They withstood the challenges that they did, the attacks, the abuse and beating, because both of them knew that they had a call on their lives. And the call was from Jesus. You see, Jesus is the ultimate best friend. He comes down, lives a perfect life, dies for us while we were in sin. And then he says, because I've died and risen, you can now be friends with God the Father. But then in John 15, he says, no greater love has a man than to die for his friends. Then he says, a few verses down, love one another. So he says, after I've done all this for you and put you in relationship with God the Father, love one another. In other words, as a believer, you have to be looking at other believers. How can I befriend them? Because Jesus called me to love them. And if I love them, how I befriend them and how I walk in the journey of friendship with them is different from the world. I'm not trying to impress them, but I'm trying to do everything that Barnabas did. Display those characteristics of a true, meaningful friend. And the biggest thing we can continue doing in our friendships is not have coffee. That's great. I enjoy coffee. Trust me. Talking about football. That's great. But it's to continually take each other to Jesus. When we as friends have met, you have seen Jesus' face clearer than before. So both of us grow in full maturity. And so as I read about the life of Barnabas, I was challenged to ask myself a few questions. Am I the kind of friend like Barnabas was? A friend who makes people's lives better because I was in their lives. A friend who demonstrates generosity. A friend who is discerning. A friend who is reliable. A friend who has a selfless attitude. A friend who exhibits humility. A friend who admits to their imperfections. A friend who is principled. Are you such a friend?